Welcome to the Overeaters Anonymous workshop on all about the 10th step. This workshop was sponsored by the OA Silicon Valley Intergroup in the South Bay of San Francisco Bay Area, San Jose. I and Sue are going to be the main presenters, but we're also going to have Gina and Trish do some presentations also. The plan for the workshop is that we're going to first have me and Sue tell our stories related to the 10th step. And I'm going to tell just a very short story for about 5 minutes because I've got lots of podcasts that I'll also give in a link later in the presentation that you can listen to my complete story somewhere else. Then Sue's going to tell her story for about 20 minutes related to the 10th step. And the video will be off, our screen sharing will be off for that. And then after that, we go back into the presentation itself, where we're going to first of all talk about step 10 from the big book's point of view, from the AA 12 and 12, and from the OA 12 and 12. And then we're going to have some examples of 10th step daily inventories, and then we'll be open for sharing from everyone after that. So at this point, I will stop sharing again. I will tell my story. What I want to really just emphasize is that I definitely qualify for this program. I came into OA about 42 years ago. My weight history before I entered OA was that I was up to top weight of 430 pounds. I actually walked in the door at about 380 pounds 42 years ago. I lost 180 pounds in my first year and got down to my goal weight, which is around 200 pounds in the first year in the program. And I stayed near there for about 9 years. I was very active in the program. I was a speaker at a lot of meetings, and I was chairperson of the intergroup. And my ego was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I wasn't really actively working the steps very much. I did go through the steps when I first entered, but I really didn't emphasize steps 10, 11, and 12. Well, I guess I did 12 because I was doing a lot of service in OA, but I didn't have a regular prayer life, and I didn't really do any regular 10 steps in any particular form. And then after about 9 years, my ego got so big that I didn't have a sponsor, and I had a binge, and then I couldn't tell anybody about it. And that entered a long period of alternating relapse recovery that ended about 15 and a half years ago, 15 and 3/4 years ago, to be more accurate. And all I can tell you is that I got to a higher top weight during that period of 460 pounds. And I started my abstinence 15 and 3/4 years ago at 400 pounds. And I'm now back down to my goal weight range within about 10 pounds or so of my goal weight. So that's my story. So I've had recovery for 15 and a half years in a row, but it's an imperfect recovery. I don't claim perfect abstinence. And I can say more about that in one of the podcasts if you want to listen to about that. The only thing I want to talk about here is that during all of my time in OA, I never really worked the 10th step regularly. I really didn't realize the importance of the 10th step. You know, if I got mad at somebody once a month and I apologized to them, yeah, I'm doing a 10th step, you know. And then at 5 years ago, that changed. What changed was that I worked the 12 steps again using the OA primary purpose format of working the steps, which is a big book centered focus for working the steps. And there, I finally got the message that step 10 is essential for working our program. This step 10 is an essential part of our spiritual awakening and our ability to change the way that we live our lives. And so at that point, I really started trying to work the steps regularly. Now I'm trying to work the 10th step regularly, and I still fail frequently. And I am trying to just tell what I would like to be doing with working the 10th step. And with that, I'll turn the rest of the meeting over to Sue to tell her story.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sue, a grateful recovering compulsive overeater. I'd like to start with my favorite prayer, and that is the set aside prayer. So if you'll bear with me for just a moment. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, this workshop, my unmanageability, my spiritual path, and you, for an open mind and a new experience of myself, this workshop, my unmanageability, and especially you, God. Amen. I want to welcome everybody here, especially people that are from out of the Silicon Valley. You're very welcome, and I'm so glad you're all here, especially anybody that's new to the program. I have been here since 1983. I came in September of 1983. and I've maintained a 65 to 70 pound weight loss pretty much that whole time. I had a relapse 3 years after I came, but for the last 35 years, God has given me the gift of being neutral with food. I came from a family of addiction. I was the youngest of 6 kids. I'm quite sure that my father was an alcoholic, and he was untreated. He was told for a medical reason to stop drinking when he was in his 20s, and he stopped cold turkey. And but I think he really struggled with the ism for the rest of his life, which wasn't very long lived. Let's see what else. The kids in my family all struggled with weight. My mother was definitely a compulsive overeater, and my father was very controlling, and I think a real rageaholic. So I grew up feeling very afraid. I felt like I was always walking on eggshells. He was a Jekyll and Hyde. We never knew who was coming home from work. So I always was in fear of him coming home. It wasn't okay in my family to just be. You had to be doing something. And when he came home from work, he would ask us if we didn't have something better to be doing, if we happened to be taking a few moments to watch television. That just wasn't okay. We had to be performing, doing something. I started showing signs of being overweight when I was 7 years old. I was always the tallest girl in the class, so I always just felt large. And I think the feeling large was partly because I couldn't bring anything home to my family. If I was feeling any emotions, I had to stuff them. So I started stuffing them with food. I grew up feeling unworthy, not enough, that there was never going to be enough of anything. A lot of deprivation, shame, and abandonment were the themes of my life. Were those the reasons I became an addict? I don't think so. They might have been a little bit or some part of the reason, but I think the real reason that I became an addict was because of the threefold illness. And I know Frank's going to talk about that a little bit, so I will just touch on it. I definitely had the allergy of the body. Sugar was my main addictive substance. I couldn't stop. Once I started, and I couldn't stop from starting again because of the phenomena of craving. And then I had the mental obsession that always told me that, I could have just one, or, this time it won't hurt, all of those excuses that we all are probably familiar with. I also had the spiritual malady, which in a class that I've been taking for quite a few years studying the big book, the teacher talks about it as the cancer of the soul. And I believe that I have a hole the size of God. Food was definitely not my problem. Food was my solution. My problem was the buildup of human emotions. And I just used food to shove those down. In step one, I had to admit that I was powerless over food, and that my life was unmanageable. In step two, so that was so I had to find a power. And in step two, I found that power who would solve all my problems. I made a choice that either, the big book says that either God is everything or God is nothing. And I definitely made the choice, and I'm still making the choice that God is everything in my life. I mean, I am far from perfect working these steps. In step three, I had to make a decision to have a relationship with that power. I don't always behave as if I trust God. I've been told that look where your feet are, and if your feet are moving in the way that you're trusting and have faith in God, that you're there. And I'm not there all the time, and I don't believe probably anybody is, but that's certainly my goal, is to be able to have that faith and trust in God. I'm still becoming, as it says in step 2, becoming willing to accept God in my life. This disease, excuse me, is progressive, permanent, and fatal. And I was really able to see that in my own family. I just need to take a quick drink. I have had 3 older siblings, and all of them had a heart episode in their 50s the same year. My oldest sister died of multiple heart attacks, a stroke, diabetes, and eventually ended up losing her leg. And my brother, when he cleaned out her house, said that he found, and this, as I said, she had diabetes. He found that she had, candy all over her house. So she just could not surrender to her disease, of all of her disease, of more. I had a brother who had a bypass surgery in his 50s, and I had another sister who died at 61. Heart disease is really rampant in my family, and I had the symptoms that my cardiologist thought were chest pain. So he did something fairly invasive and went in and took a look at the arteries. They thread a cannula or thread a little tube up your arteries and take a look. And he told me that I should go out and dance because my arteries were as clean as a whistle, or as clear as a whistle, I guess he said. And I owe that to Overeaters Anonymous. I learned very early in my family that cardiac genes were really rampant. All my grandparents, my mom's, all of her siblings died of heart disease. Anyway, I was very aware of it early on. And because of Overeaters Anonymous, I've been working on a healthy lifestyle for, as I said, the last probably 38 years or more. So that's it about the progressive, the progressive, permanent, and fatal situation in this disease, and how it manifested in my family. I went to my first pay and weigh when I was 15 years old, and I went with my mom. I also joined a gym at the same time, and I was never, ever successful. I mean, I would lose a couple of pounds and probably gain it back as soon as I, picked up my drug of choice. I just was not the least bit successful. This disease really robbed me of my youth. I never dated until I was a senior in high school. I was a little bit bullied, but always felt that I wasn't enough because of my weight, and it probably was that, as well as my family not a lot. We were not allowed to talk or to share feelings, as I said earlier. When I was in my 20s, I hurt my back, which I still suffer from that, and I went to see an orthopedic specialist, and he was not the least bit concerned about my back. All he was worried about, or all he could think of, was that me, being 5'8", should weigh 118 pounds. Well, I'm a nurse, so I thought, up to that point anyway, I did respect doctors. But all I heard was shame on you. And that was such a theme that had run through my whole life up to that point, that that's what I heard. And then, as I said, I've been a lifelong gym member, and I went to my gym really within a couple of days of that time. And the manager, it was back in the long ago when people weighed and measured you. And she said to me, "My God, Sue, you've been here 6 months and you haven't lost anything. Why don't you just take it slow and just lose 10 pounds a month?" And for us, 10 pounds a month is ridiculous. But, I heard shame again. I heard her say that you're just not good enough, Sue. You're bad. You're wrong. So I made a decision, and it was a very conscious decision. And keep in mind, I have not come to Overeaters Anonymous yet. So I made this decision based on willpower, which is certainly still, that's part of the unmanageability of this disease. I made the decision that no one was going to shame me again as far as my weight. And so I couldn't exercise anymore because I had really hurt my back. So I decided to swim. And I swam every day, 5 days a week. And I don't know if I was bulimic with exercise at that point or not. I don't think so. I wasn't swimming an unreasonable amount, but the bulimic part may have been that I had to, because I had to get this weight off, had to keep this weight off, which was much more important to me. And, I really know it was just a matter of time. And I also think that it was in God's divine plan that I would then walk around stark raving on a diet for almost 4 years before I found Overeaters Anonymous. I found it not by accident. I don't believe that in my life there's any accidents. A friend said, I can't, see you this particular night because I'm going to Overeaters Anonymous. And so I pleaded with her to take me to that first meeting. I'll go back a couple of steps. So what I did was I cut out flour. I cut out sugar. I cut out fats. And for the next 6 months, I lost 10 pounds a month. I don't know why that was. It's just what happened. Probably if anybody, but you know what? The truth is that I had dieted up to that point and I could never follow through with that. I had always exercised. It did not make any difference. I couldn't get the weight off. I believe this was in God's divine plan for me. I really do. And then I also believe that for the next 4 years, I kind of wandered around aimlessly in terror of gaining the weight back. That's all that was on my mind. I mean, here I have a thin body and I have no tools to deal with it. I don't recommend it, believe me. If I would have known about Overeaters Anonymous, then I would have been knocking on the door. But, that was just my plan. So I went to my first meeting. That was 38 years ago. And there has never been a day when I have not been willing to go to a meeting. I've always cherished this beautiful program that some of us are gifted to be able to come to and to be able to stay at. I mean, I really believe that we are a chosen few that find this program. And I'm not going to apologize for my tears because I truly have such gratitude for this program. It has saved my life. It may not have saved me physically because as I said, I came in and I had lost the weight, but and that would have been a matter of time when I'd probably gained it back. But what it did was it saved my sanity. I was so very desperate and broken and powerless when I came to this program that I would have done anything my sponsor had asked me to do. I got a sponsor within the first week of the program. And I did whatever she told me to do. We started working the steps immediately. And I didn't get past step 5, and we moved to California from Minnesota, which for many of you, I'm sure you know that California is the hub of where Overeaters Anonymous started. So I felt very fortunate to move to an area that had more than 2 meetings a week. That's what I was experiencing in Minnesota. So we started working out of the big book, the AA Big Book, and the AA 12 and 12, which is the only literature that was available at the time. And I got through the 5th step. And then, as I said, we moved to California. And 3 months or 4 months after I moved here, having left my family, all my friends, and my total support system of Overeaters Anonymous, we went back for Christmas, and my boss gave me something, and I thought, well, I'll just take it back, to Minnesota and share it, or not share it. I'll give it to my family. Well, that's not what happened. I felt just totally disconnected. I didn't feel like I fit anymore with my friends in Minnesota. They had moved on without me, and I didn't feel like I fit in California. I mean, I immediately went to Overeaters Anonymous, but I still didn't feel connected. So I had a relapse, and I had a relapse that lasted just about a week or so. And, why did that happen? Why did what was I given the gift of being able to get back on my program? I know the reason. I know it was the total grace of God. There's no question in my mind about that, because God had other plans for me. Let's see, what else do I want to share? About I'm going to want to talk about how I came to believe in God and what kind of a background I came from. I grew up in a really religious family, and I attended the church school. I'm not going to name any names, and I attended that all the way through college. And the school, my church, and my family did not ever acknowledge that there was a loving God. I grew up feeling that God was very punitive, and as soon as I left for college, I turned my back on the God of my childhood, which was, not anything that I wanted anything to do with. A few weeks before I came to Overeaters Anonymous, I got a postcard in the mail, and it was a few weeks before I came into the program, I started having a really bone marrow yearning for finding a higher power in my life. And I got a postcard in the mail from a church that invited me to it. And I just somehow knew that part of my job was I was a school nurse, and one of the teachers there I knew went to that church. So I thought, what the heck, it's so far removed from the church of my growing up years, I'm going to give it a try. And I went, and it was just a hand in glove. It ended up being a hand in glove with Overeaters Anonymous. The minister was an AA person. It just flowed perfectly. And so I thanked that teacher for sending me that postcard, because I knew she was on the board there. And she said, "Sue, I don't know what you're talking about." She said, "We don't send out postcards. I have no idea what you're talking about." And to this day, I have no idea how that postcard came to be, but I believe it was a miracle. And I just read and I'm going to probably blow this completely, but I just read a quote by Einstein, and it says, "There's two ways to look at everything in your life. Either everything is a miracle or nothing is a miracle." And I am choosing to believe that everything in my life is a miracle today, because I am a miracle. And if you're here today, you are too. I really did not intend to be a blithering idiot today, but I guess that's what has come out. My Achilles heel, I think we all have such a thing. For some people, it's, kids and money and marriage and whatever. My Achilles heel has always been my health. I told you about my chronic back pain, and about 30 years ago, I developed a chronic illness, and I lost 20 pounds and just could not. I mean, I got down to being pretty much a skeleton. I was just a bare nerve walking around. What did I want to say about that? Just had just an array, a cluster of symptoms, and I was just so terrified. And at the time, there weren't a lot of medical people that knew anything about this. And, it just really set me into a tailspin. But what I was most afraid of, I ended up having to quit my job. And to me, to quit my job felt like I was going to become the donut in the hole. I mean, I just thought I would evaporate. I thought my husband would leave me. Like, for what value would I have if I couldn't work? It was one of the worst things that, if not the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it turned out to be the best thing as well. Because I came to know, or not to know, but to believe that I have value just because I exist, and that I don't have to it is fine to be, and I don't have to be doing all the time to have value. And I did not know that growing up. I had no idea. That just was not something that that was part of my experience at all. Yeah, so that was really a devastating piece of my life, but it turned out to be one of the best things that has ever happened to me. I was unable to return to work because for 2 years I could barely get out of bed. And anyway, that's history that I don't need to dwell on. The only other thing that's been really significant is that about 20 something years, no, it was probably 25 years ago, I was diagnosed with severe osteoporosis. I was still quite young, so they were very puzzled by it. And the doctor who diagnosed me forgot to do a very simple urine test, which would have told her that I was spilling calcium into my urine, and I would have avoided. I've had 20 plus fractures, and but I've been, I'm doing an in-depth 4-step right now, and I know that I thought that I had forgiven her, but I still have got some energy and some feeling around that. So I will get there. There's no question. I will use the steps of this program to be able to forgive that person and to move on with my life. I'm going to talk about resentment later, and I'm going to talk about forgiveness later. And I don't have any room in my life to hate people, to resent people. It's just there's not any room for me to do that. It's a deadly proposition. Because I have the chronic pain and the chronic illness, I have truly learned what it means to have one day at a time. And to try and stay in the present, because we have no guarantees about tomorrow, and I have certainly learned that with what I've gone through. If anybody, there are 3 meetings, and I'll just say this really briefly, that are dedicated in Overeaters Anonymous. Of course, every meeting is for everybody, but it's for people with chronic illness and chronic pain. And if anybody wants to call me, I will give you that information offline. I've been able to deal with my illnesses, with my pain, I don't know what to say, without it. It certainly has not identified. It has not told me who I am. It's part of what I have, but it's not who I am. And I think that's God's given me a disposition to be able to accept things that I can't change. This program certainly has emphasized that. And how is that possible? How am I not? When I was in bed for 2 years, I don't think I got depressed then. I do have to admit, but I continued to go to meetings. This, as I said, this program has saved my life on lots of levels. I'm a kind of a half full, cup full kind of person. And I think God has given me that grace, and God's given me the grace to get through what I've had to get through. Maybe it's because he's going to use me. I asked God to use me before I got online today, that maybe just one person can hear something that they need to hear. And it's not up to me if they don't, but that would be my gift if it were to happen. I've had a lot of sponsors over the 38 years. Every time I've worked the steps with a sponsor, I've gone deeper. And I know that I've increased my spiritual growth. I had my first spiritual awakening during my first 4th step. I would say during the 5th step, I knew that I was in a different place. I no longer had that obsession with the food that I had when I came into the program. Last year, I did a very in-depth study of the big book and the 4th step, and I was able to forgive my father. I don't know if I mentioned earlier, because I was a little anxious starting, that he was very abusive, both physically and emotionally. And I held on to that for, I hate to tell you how many years, way too many years. And I was victimized, but I am not a victim. I'm responsible for my recovery and for my life. And I will not let anything hold me back from my recovery. Not any resentment, not any harms, nothing. It's just not, I won't do it. Today, food is not an option in my life, because if it were an option, it would always be an option. I wrote a couple things about what I've learned. One of the biggest things I've learned, and I know I belong in another program, is to not think or not to take things personally. That's been a lesson that I'll probably be learning the rest of my life. But I really try to not take things personally. Today, I have the willingness to take the actions, but grace comes in as a gift. If I put forth some willingness and some action, God takes care of the rest. I really believe that. And my teacher tells us that willingness without action is fantasy. And I have a good friend in this program, and she also talks about willingness, that willingness doesn't go very far if you don't put your feet into it. Let's see. I think I'm getting pretty much to the end. I do something. I've been working on something, and that is to learn loving compassion for myself. I certainly did not learn that growing up, but I think it's one of the biggest things that I need to learn, how to be gentle and loving to myself. Let me just see if there's anything I might have missed. In OA, we speak the language of the heart. I think that's why, at least why when I came, I knew that I was here for the long haul. I knew that this was the place that I could spend the rest of my life. Emotional pain and sponsees, and certainly my dear sponsor have been my best teachers. I try to remember what Dr. Bob's prescription said, and that's trust God, clean house, and help others. And if I can remember to do those three things, I think I'm really on my way. And with that, I'll pass. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, so I know a number of you joined while Sue and I were telling our stories here. So let me welcome you to the Overeaters Anonymous Silicon Valley workshop, all about the 10th step. And the only part you've missed is our stories, and that this will be recorded and you will be able to have access to it, so you can hear those stories later. But you're in time for all the foils that we're going to present here. So, and first of all, let me make a note that at the end of this presentation, in the chat, I'm going to post a link. And if you click on that link, you will go to a Google Drive where you'll see a list of about 6 files. These are all the files associated with this presentation, which will include these PowerPoint slides as a PDF. So you'll be able to get a copy of all these PowerPoint slides after the workshop. And it also will have a file that'll have all the links. If you see any links on any of the screens here, we will supply those links in that file there. So you don't have to write down the links or anything like that. You'll be able to get them all there. And then it'll also have all the individual kinds of ways of working the 10th step. Let me go through what the order is here. So first of all, you missed this part of Frank and Sue telling their stories, but you're in time for hearing about the step 10 from the Big Book point of view, from the AA 12 and 12 point of view, and from the OA 12 and 12 point of view. And then after that, we'll have examples of 10th step daily inventories. And then at that point, we'll have open sharing. And if anyone has a question for either Sue or I, you could send it to, I'll just pick Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, you can curate the questions and then ask us those questions as we go through. So send a chat message to Elizabeth, and then we'll be able to answer any questions you have after we finish this part of the sharing, before we go to the open sharing, I guess, unless we don't have enough time. We'll see how it goes. All right, so let's dig right into it. This is the step 10 from the Big Book point of view. And as Sue mentioned, the Big Book's model of addiction talks about the allergy of the body, and they talk about this in the doctor's opinion. And what the allergy of the body means is that once we start to compulsively overeat, we cannot stop. We will keep on going, because that's the nature of our disease. We have that allergy of the body that once we start, we can't stop. And it's that way if you have a red light foods, like if you're really addicted to sweets, once you start to have a sweet, you can't stop having it. Or I'm the case that's addicted to quantity. So once I start to binge on a huge quantity of food, I'll just keep binging for the rest of the day, and who knows if and when I'll ever stop. So that's the allergy of the body. Now, people that have a peanut allergy have an allergy of the body. And once they recognize, hey, I've got a peanut allergy, that means I can't ever eat peanuts again. They have no problem stopping the eating of peanuts. And, you know, if we had the similar situation here, if we could recognize we have this allergy of the body, we can never have that food item again, or we can never eat quantity in that quantity again. We wouldn't need the 12-step program. All we'd have to do is work step one. That's essentially working step one. The problem is the compulsive overeater and the addict, besides having the allergy of the body, also has the obsession of the mind. And this is the part of our mind that will go in and try to trick us into taking that first bite. You know, it'll be okay. You can get away with it this time. It won't happen again. You're in control now. You haven't had that for how many months now? You know, it's all right. You're obviously okay. And once that obsession of the mind tricks us into taking that first bite, then we're off and running because we've activated the allergy of the body. So my point is that step one is enough to deal with the allergy of the body. And the way that we deal with the obsession of the mind is by using steps 2 through 12. That's what deals with the obsession of the mind. And the way that it deals with that is by giving us a spiritual awakening. That's what it promises at the 12th step, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. It's not a result. The result that you get from working the 12 steps is a spiritual awakening. And it's a spiritual awakening that allows you to tamp down that obsession of the mind and not believe it when it tries to tell you those lies. And it lets you just say, thank you very much for sharing, and go on with your day without taking that first bite. So step 10 is on page 59 of the big book, and it says, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Not if we are wrong, when we are wrong. We are guaranteed to be wrong, and we will promptly admit it when we do that. So the 10th step starts right after the 9th step promises. So let me actually back up to the end of the 9th step promises and talk about that for a second. So if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. This means before we are halfway through the 9th step, we will be amazed. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. And it goes on from there. And by the way, whenever I am quoting directly from the big book or the 12 and 12, AA or OA 12 and 12, I will put the text in italics like you see here. And if there's some part of the text that I skip, I'll put that square brackets with ... in it. That just means I skipped some text at that point in the book, and go on from there. I will also change the word alcohol and alcoholic to food and compulsive overeater in here, so it applies directly to us. And the last thing is that sometimes there'll be text that'll be shown in blue. That's a comment on the quoted text, or it's information about what that text was that was omitted. So that's the format of the text here on these slides. So then it continues on. Later on, it says, we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. And that ends the 9th step promises, and that in the 9th step in the big book. And then the next sentence, the next paragraph goes on with step 10. And it says, this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. So this is just a restatement of the 10th step. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. So notice this, that we vigorously commence this way of living. This way of living is steps 10, 11, and 12. Those are the daily living steps that we need to work every day. And this is telling us that we should start working steps 10, 11, and 12 as we cleaned up the past. Now, when are we cleaning up the past? We are cleaning up the past in step 9. So while you start working step 9, you should also work steps 10, 11, and 12. And this makes sense because you don't want to make mistakes in your daily life while you're working step 9 that you're going to have to go through and do another step 9 to clean up later. So you should be using step 10 to clean up the mistakes as you go forward here, so that you don't have to clean up any more mistakes after you finish all the mistakes of step 9 that you clean up. And then it says, we have entered the world of the spirit. This is another way of saying that we've gotten the spiritual awakening. We've begun to get the spiritual awakening as we were working step 9, and as we continue to work step 10, 11, and 12, we've gotten the spiritual awakening, And that's what's going to allow us to not take that first bite one day at a time. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. So this is telling us that we need to keep working steps 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis for the rest of our life. And this sentence here is getting into the meat of step 10. That's why I put it in bold. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately. We make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. So that text in bold there is the meat of step 10, and I'm going to go through it in detail on the next slide here. First of all, it says continue to watch for. Now, I'm a physicist, but I'm also a software engineer, and in software engineering, there's this concept of a countdown timer. And the idea is that if you, a watchdog timer, a watchdog timer. The idea is that if there's some condition in the program that's supposed to handle, and you need to find out when that condition happens, you might set a timer that would wake up once a minute, or maybe once a second, or 10 times in a second, depending on what you need to keep looking out for. And that program will wake up and it will look to see if that condition arises. If that condition arises, it handles it. If the condition doesn't arise, then it just goes back to sleep and waits for the next time it's going to wake up. I need to install a watchdog timer up here in my brain. And it needs to notice, when am I engaging in one of my character defects? That's what the watchdog timer needs to wake up and try to notice that and get it. Now, I have not successfully installed that watchdog timer, but the practice of working step 10 over and over and over again regularly on a regular basis can help to install that kind of a watchdog timer. So we become better and better at noticing when we're engaging in a step 10 activity. I can often be, if I get angry at something or somebody, I can be just blasting them with anger for, minutes, hours, who knows, days, maybe, who knows how long it's going to take before I say, oh, wait a second, this is something I need to work a step 10 on. And that when that watchdog timer finally notices that there's something I need to work to step 10 on, that is the beginning of step 10, because right here, the watchdog timer went off and told me to pay attention to that thing. And then I watched for, was I selfish, dishonest, resentful, or afraid? Now, these are the things that we're looking out for. In step 4, we do an inventory on resentments, fear, and sexual conduct. So resentments and fear are covered here. And the sexual conduct is replaced with selfish and dishonest. And there might be some relationship between sexual conduct issues and selfishness and dishonesty. But that's the list that we're looking for here in step 10. But I'd really like to point out that all of my character defects come from my selfishness and self-centeredness. And that's what it says on page 62 of the big book. It says selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our problems. And I'm going to show you a quiz on the next page, which I think will demonstrate that for you. So I look for when one of these conditions came up. And then the very first thing that I do after that is I ask God to remove it. God, please remove that defect at once. And by the way, when I'm looking for one of those character defects, that's a step 4 type of work. So we're doing step 4 there when we notice those character defects that we have. And then when we ask God to remove that, that's working step 6, because I'm powerless over my character defect. I can't fix it. I ask God to remove it. That's step 7. And this is the form of a prayer. God, please remove the character defect. So this is a step 11 prayer. So this is like working a step 11 on that particular issue. And then I discuss this with someone immediately. And for all the years that I worked this program, up until 5 years ago, for what, 37 years, I thought this was an optional part of the 10th step. Because sometimes when you do work a 10th step, oh, I've got to go and talk to that person and make an amends. Okay, so that's very clear. I don't need to talk to my sponsor about that. Or maybe it's impossible. The person's gone. I'm never going to see them again. There's no way I can go and make an amends. So I don't need to make an amends in that case. And I thought it was only when there were questionable conditions where I may or may not need to make an amends that I would have to talk to my sponsor and discuss it with him and decide whether I need to make an amends or not. But the problem is, if I leave out that part of step 10, that's like trying to work the 12 steps without doing a step 5. And one of the purposes of step 5 is to decrease my ego. My ego is the problem. And to tell my sponsor once again, I got angry at my wife. That's admitting my character defect that I've been trying to work on for a long time, and I failed once again. And I admit to my sponsor that I got angry at my wife. So that step 5 is essential. And it's essential. It's easy to do these days with text messages. I can just send a text message to my sponsor saying, 10th step, whatever the defect is. That's all I need to do. But it's telling some other person that I had that problem. And then it goes on, and that's working step 5. If I've harmed anyone, I make amends quickly. So again, this is like working step 8 and step 9 on the problem that we just had here. And if there's any harm to anybody, I got to make an amends to that person if I can. I turn my thoughts to someone to help. That's trying to be of service to somebody, and that can be a step 12. And it could be doing step 12 work. You could be making a phone call to an OA member, but it could be doing any kind of help for anybody in the world. You could be, instead of rushing into the store, you could pause and actually open the door and let somebody else in ahead of you. You could strike up a friendly conversation with the clerk at the store. Any way that you can help somebody else, slow down on the freeway, or get over in the move to the right so that people can pass me instead of hogging the left lane on the freeway. Any way that you can be of help to other people, that's the thing that you do here. So this is trying to get us out of ourselves and into helping others. That's what this program is about. So that's working step 12. And then love of tolerance of others is our code. So I mentioned that I think that all selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of all of my problems. And I heard someone at a meeting give this quiz, and I've adopted it for myself. I added one phrase to it, but most of this quiz was from somebody else. And so here's the quiz, Am I Selfish quiz. And remember, you'll get a copy of this right after the meeting here. So here's the quiz. If I am resentful, it is because someone did not do what I wanted them to do in the past. They did not do it my way, and that is being selfish. So all resentments are coming from selfishness and self-centeredness. If I'm angry, it's because someone is not doing what I want them to do right now. They are not doing it my way, and that is being selfish. If I am fearful, it's because I know that someone is not going to do what I want them to do in the future. They are not going to do it my way, and that is being selfish. If I feel guilty or remorseful, it's because I got my own way at your expense, and that is being selfish. If I feel jealous or envious, it's because someone has something I want, and I want it now, and that is being selfish. And I think you could apply the same principle to any other character defect that you can come up with. That, all of our character defects come from that selfishness and self-centeredness that the big book says on page 62. So that completes the meat of step 10. And the next paragraph in the big book is the 10-step promises. And we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even food, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in food. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. Now that recoiling from it as from a hot flame, that is the miracle of this program, because a compulsive reader who has that obsession of the mind, when they get tempted with some food, they see their binge food right out there, somebody's eating it right in front of them. Normally, that would trigger the temptation, the obsession of the mind to start obsessing about that food and oh, boy, that really looks good. I wish I could have a bite. Oh, but I shouldn't. And the obsession of the mind will just be triggered and going on like that. With the spiritual awakening that we have, we will recoil from it as from a hot flame. We realize, oh, that is not my food. Someone else is eating food that I do not eat. And that can be the end of it. It can end that obsession of the mind. So this is the spiritual awakening. This is what we get from working the steps. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward food has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the spiritual awakening. That's the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we have been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. That is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. And keeping in fit spiritual condition is keeping that spiritual awakening that we got as a result of working these 12 steps. So that's the 10-step promises. And I think these are as wonderful as the 9-step promises and very relevant to our addiction with food. I wish we read them at meetings more often. And then step 10 goes on and gives us some advice. It's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We are headed for trouble if we do, for food is a subtle foe. We are not cured of compulsive overeating. Notice that we are not cured of compulsive overeating. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Every day is a day we must carry the vision of God into all of our activities. How can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. These are the thoughts which must go with us constantly. We can exercise our willpower along this line all we wish. It is the proper use of the food. Now remember, I introduced myself as a recovered compulsive overeater. What does that mean? What does recovered mean? Well, this teaches us that we are not cured of compulsive overeating. And what that means to me is that I still have that allergy of the body. If I was cured of compulsive overeating, I wouldn't have the allergy of the body and the obsession line. They'd both be gone completely and never to return if I was cured. But if I'm not cured, but I'm recovered, then I still have that allergy of the body. And if I start to overeat, I probably cannot stop. And I don't want to try the experiment to see if I can, but I probably cannot stop. So I probably still have that allergy of the body. But what I have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition, contingent on my working steps 10, 11, and 12, and contingent on me working the program in all the ways that I do. And this daily reprieve is the spiritual awakening that deals with the obsession of the mind. So what the being recovered compulsive overeater means that I no longer have that obsession of the mind that is driving me to fight against taking that first bite over and over again. It really has become, just routine. The obsession of the mind. Oh, if it does, I mean, I get food thoughts still they pop up, but they go away quickly. That's the recovered part of this program for me. If I wasn't recovered, I would nurse that thought and think about it some more. And maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. Oh, I don't have to tell my sponsor about that. Whatever it is, that obsession of the mind is what is deadly, and that's the sense in which I'm recovered. I can deal with the obsession of the mind without starting the allergy of the body. And notice that this paragraph also had the 10th step prayer. How can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. And these thoughts must go with us constantly. So it's encouraging us to say that constantly. Now, what I did was, I was never good at doing this, but about 5 years ago, when I realized the importance of step 10 and of the step 10 prayer, I put a calendar event in my Google Calendar for 11:30 at night. And then I made 6 notifications, about 3 hours apart back through the day, going back from 11:30 at night. So now I get 6 notifications on my phone that remind me, thy will, not mine, be done. And it just gives me a moment a reminder and a moment to say that in my head whenever I get that notification on my phone, because I don't remember to say that automatically 6 times a day, but at least my phone can help me remember to say it 6 times a day. And then there's more advice about step 10. Much has been already said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from him who has all knowledge and power. If we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of the Spirit into us. To some extent, we have become God conscious. We have begun to develop this vital 6th sense, but we must go further, and that means more action. And the next paragraph says, step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. We shouldn't be shy on this matter of prayer. Better man than we have been using it constantly. It works if we have the proper attitude and work on it. It would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. And now Sue is going to talk about step 11 from the big book. And you might ask, why are we talking about step 11 in the big book? I thought this was a 10th step workshop. Well, part of step 11 has become incorporated into the 10th step, which is what you will see. So Sue, take it over from here.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thanks for putting all these slides together. I'm going to first say what the 11th step is. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. I normally do the 10th step exactly the way that Frank just outlined. But I decided, since, sometimes I don't get to doing the 10th step till later in the day, I incorporate it with the 11th step. And we're going to talk about the spot check and all of that, so I'll just get into it. I wanted to read something from the big book on, I guess it's the next slide, Frank, about resentment.
Oh, well, okay. So
okay.
Here's the first sentence of the next page. When we retire at night,
Yeah.
we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Okay, so now we're going to talk about resentment. Go ahead. Oops,
yeah.
I went the wrong way. There we go.
No problem. It is plain, this is on page 66 of the big book. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. But with the compulsive overeater, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. For when harboring these feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. The insanity of food returns and we overeat again. And with us, to overeat is to die. And now I'll go back to where we are. So I always do this 11th step at night. And as I said, if I haven't done a 10th step, I will incorporate it in here because it asks the same questions. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? And these are the same that are from the 10th step and very similar to the 4th step. Do we owe an apology? And that's, have we done something throughout the day that we need to get back to someone and make an amends or a change? Have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? Most of this would be covered in our inventory. Do we need to tell somebody about something that we're wanting to kind of hide or be secretive of? Were we kind and loving toward all? That's a tall order, but none of us are perfect. I think if we make our best, if we do our best, then we can be kind and loving to all, or at least all that are in our circle. What could we have done better? This is where I try to take a look at whether or not I've made outreach calls that day. That's certainly something that I could have done better to enrich my spiritual life. Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time? That's, and then it asks, or could we, so that's kind of a question that is answered in the next statement. Or were we thinking of what we could do for others, of what we could pack into the stream of life? Anything, I believe, that enhances the life of another person during your day answers that question. And I have a tremendous list of what the definitions are for each of these: resentful, selfish, dishonest, and afraid. And I'll go over those in just a few minutes. It's the best thing I've ever seen.
And then we put those questions back into paragraph form like this. And then we can continue.
Yeah, and we can continue on to the next slide. But we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. And I look at how it wouldn't be helpful if I looked at, my character defects and thought how flawed I am, or start going down that rabbit hole. So I need to, I need to forgive myself and move on. Next slide. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. Even if I don't have any obvious errors, I say a prayer to be forgiven in case I've overlooked something. I end that with, God, please forgive me for how I have failed, and show me what corrective measures I can take. About forgiveness, it doesn't mean that I'm condoning anybody's bad behavior. It just means that I'm releasing them so that I can be released. And then you can just move to the next slide because I did that one. Okay, these are the definitions that one of my sponsees sent to me, and it's from oasponsor.org. So you can find it there, but you'll also have it in our PDF. And I'm not going to go over all of these, but just cite some of the ones that I find to be the most useful to me. So what does selfishness mean? One of the things that it means to me is not seeing the other person's point of view, problems, or needs. And then in the last column, I just am going to highlight 3 of them. Reacting from self-loathing, self-righteousness, trying to control how people think or perceive me. And I can certainly relate to that one. I used to manage people's opinion of me for sure, with my great codependency, wanting to look good or be liked. And I said where there, and then the next one is self-seeking. And out of that, if they like me, then I'm okay. So that's the first one, seeking myself in others. That's one good definition of self-seeking. Then down a few, I selected putting others down internally or externally to build myself up. The next one, engaging in character assassination, or we know it as gossip. And then the last column, I'm just going to highlight a couple. Getting revenge when I didn't get what I wanted, holding on to a resentment. And then the last one, did I play the victim, the protector, or the savior? And let me just get to the next slide. Dishonest, not seeing or admitting where I'm at fault. That's just precious. I just love that one. And then having a superior attitude, thinking I'm better. A lot of these we wouldn't think of necessarily as being dishonest, but I think they fit perfectly. And then in the last column, exaggerate or minimize stories, thoughts, etc. Expecting others to be what they're not, and being perfectionistic ourselves. And then I think we're down to the last one, and that's frightening or being fearful. A common one for me, because it ran so through my life, was rejection and abandonment. And a couple down, not being able to control, change something or someone, and then being frightened of criticism, expressing ideas, feelings. And that's something that I have to really, really work on, so that I don't have, sometimes I have fear that I don't want to have a conflict. So I don't want to speak my truth. That's a big one. And then the very last one is inconsiderate. Can you flip to the next one? Oh, it's right there. Thank you, Frank. We don't often think of this as one of the character defects, but it's listed in the sex inventory. So I think that's why it's listed here. And the first one's not considering the other person's point of view, problems, or needs. Boy, that sounds pretty much like selfishness. And am I treating myself with respect? Okay, that's it for that. And the next slide, Frank, please. I included 2 different resentment prayers because I think it's invaluable when we're working our 10th or 11th step, to make sure if we have a resentment that we do a prayer at the end of that inventory, or at that end of 10th or 11th step. So I'm just going to read this one. I think most of you are probably familiar with it. It's on page 552 of the 4th edition of the Big Book. If you have a resentment you want to be free of, if you will pray for the person or thing that you resent, you will be free. If you will ask in prayer for everything, you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. Ask for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, and you will be free. Even when you don't want it for them, your prayers are only and your prayers are only words, and you don't mean it. Go ahead and do it anyway. Do it for every day for 2 weeks or 2 months, whatever it takes, as far as I'm concerned. And you will find you have come to mean it and want it for them. And you will realize that where you used to feel bitterness and resentment and hatred, you now feel compassion and understanding. And so, as I said, I always, if I have a resentment towards somebody, I do a resentment prayer. Usually the one I do is the next one. If you can flip to the next slide, Frank. This is from the 4th step in the big book, and it's a little bit different than that, but that's where it originates. God, and then you insert the name, like me, is spiritually sick. I always have to remember that I'm spiritually sick when I've got a resentment towards somebody else. Please help me show that individual, principle, or thing tolerance, compassion, and patience. In the big book, it says pity, and I happen to like compassion better. And I didn't come up with that, but that's why I use this prayer. Release me from being angry. Enable me to release this resentment. Remove this resentment. Show me how to take a kindly and tolerant view of blank. Bring me to accept reality as it is, and show me how I can be helpful. And again, thy will be done. And then the second meditation in the big book, on page 86, I try to go through this. We just decided to go ahead and just finish up the meditations since I did the first meditation of step 11, we decided to do both. So upon awakening, we think about the next 24 hours. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. And I always add selfishness, dishonesty, fear, and self-reliance. Self-reliance is a big one for me. And then under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance. For after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. And then in the next slide, in thinking about our day, we may face indecision. I pretty much always do, so this is really helpful for me. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here we ask for inspiration, an intuitive thought, or a decision. And I know absolutely when God has spoken how smoothly my decision goes. I mean, there's just no question. When God's involved in my decision, it runs very smooth. And there is a prayer there that says, anytime in the big book where it says, we ask, that's a prayer. So we ask for inspiration, intuitive thought, or a decision. And it might, we relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. We are often surprised how the right answers come after we have tried this for a while. What used to be a hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. And then the next slide. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it is not probable that we're going to be inspired at all times. We may pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will be, as time passes, be more and more on a plane of inspiration. We come to rely on it. And I'd like to say, I really do, because I really believe it might not come today, but I just trust that it's going to come. We usually conclude the period of meditation with a prayer that we be shown all through the day what our next step is to be, that we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems. And then the next step, Frank, we ask, and this is a prayer, we especially ask for freedom from self-will and are careful to make no requests for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves, however, if others will be helped. We are careful never to pray for our own selfish ends. Many of us have wasted a lot of time doing that, and it doesn't work. You can easily see why, and there's more text as Frank indicated. And then as we go through our day, and this is probably the most important part for me of the morning meditation, as we go through the day, we pause when agitated, and that's just another name for angry or doubtful. You know, if we're afraid, I would say doubtful is probably a synonym for that. And ask for the right thought or action. We constantly remind ourselves that we're no longer running the show. And I have to laugh when I see that. And I just say, and I never was, because I know I wasn't. Humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, there it is again, that beautiful prayer, thy will be done. And as Frank says, and I got it from him, I set a timer every day too on my phone, and it goes off. And I just try to remember to say that prayer, thy will be done. How can I serve thee? And I write a letter to God every day. I just started doing that since the OA birthday party. And it has been such a big part of my 11th step, my prayer and meditation. And then lastly, we are then, the next slide, yes, the next, oh yeah, I got it. We are then in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. We become much more efficient. We do not tire so easily, for we're not burning up energy foolishly. I think I missed that. Tire so easily, for we're not burning up energy foolishly as we did when we were trying to arrange life to suit us. It works, it really does. We compulsive overeaters are undisciplined, so we let God discipline us in the simple way that was just outlined, and that's about both the nightly review and upon awakening. And that's it for that. Oh, no, it isn't, sorry.
Yeah. Oh.
Or it is, that's the end of those slides. Okay.
Right. And I just want to add one thing there. You notice in that 11th step there that we ask for inspiration, the intuitive hunch. If you listen to one of my podcasts, I came in here as an absolute atheist, and what I eventually developed a higher power that I call my higher self. And I basically turned that intuitive part of my brain into my higher self. So Frank the addict sitting here talking to you, this is the Frank who's powerless over food. But that intuitive part of my brain is the higher self, and that's what I listen for, that intuitive thought from my higher self, rather than my own thought, which is almost always the bad idea. Anyway, I stepped in here because I wanted to talk about how this became part of step 10. So the big book had two forms of meditation, one in the morning and one in the evening. And then it says we usually conclude this period of meditation, and that proves that those were considered to be meditations with a prayer, and they go on and discuss prayers for the rest of the 11th step. Now, first of all, those big book meditations don't seem like the mindfulness meditation, which is the dominant form of meditation that's taught today. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about meditation as we've experienced it here in the Western world. You know, for in the early 60s, the Eastern religions of Hinduism and Buddhism started to become introduced to the Western world by some popular teachers, and they taught forms of meditation from those spiritual paths, those Eastern spiritual paths. And then in the 1970s, John Kabat-Zinn took those forms of meditation and made it into a very secular meditation called mindfulness meditation. And that was a class that was offered a lot to a lot of different people. I've taken it, and probably some of you have taken it. If you haven't taken it, you've probably heard of it before. But mindfulness meditation is a kind of a meditation where you're basically just paying attention to what you're experiencing at any given moment. And it could be, for example, in a form where you're paying attention to the feeling of the breath as it comes in and out of your nose, and you just keep trying to pay attention to that. And what'll happen while you're doing that is, a thought will come in. Oh, what am I going to do when I get out of this meditation? And the meditation teaches you to just dismiss that thought and let it go and get back to the original object that you had. That's mindfulness meditation. Another way of doing it would be to pay attention to your body. You might start with your feet and notice any sensations that you're experiencing there and go up your body and then back down again. There's a lot of different ways of doing it, but during those meditations, thoughts come, they are guaranteed to come. And when they come, you just kind of let them go. Whereas these meditations in the big book are asking you to think about this, and then think about that, you know? So it seems very different from the meditation that I've been taught in these classes. And the thing is, these big book meditations are a form of contemplative meditation. And you know, you've heard of monks that take a vow of silence and they go into their abbey and they spend all their day meditating. They're doing this kind of contemplative meditation. They would read some holy book and then do a contemplative meditation about the meaning of that in their lives and or about God or whatever it is. There are many, many different ways of doing contemplative meditation. And the big book here gave you two examples, the upon awakening or the when we retire at night. Those are two examples of doing a contemplative meditation. And the 11th step in the AA 12 and 12 has another example of contemplative meditation. They start with the prayer, "The Lord make me an instrument of a channel of thy peace," which is otherwise known as the prayer of St. Francis to some of us. And they take that prayer and they go for the next 2 pages. They describe different ways of attacking that prayer from a contemplative meditation point of view. Thinking about the man who wrote it, you know, about his characteristics, thinking about the meaning of these phrases that you go through there. So these are forms of contemplative meditation. So these are just as valid forms of meditation as mindfulness meditation. And it's been the dominant form of meditation in the West. You know, and that was definitely what was dominant back in the 1930s and 50s when the big book and the AA 12 and 12 were written. So this first meditation of when we retire now at night is now called a daily 10-step inventory, although in the big book it was a meditation. It was a nighttime meditation. And note that the big book evening meditation is a purely mental meditation, whereas a lot of the daily 10-step inventories are now written down. They aren't always written down, but they can be written down. So the daily meditations are different in that sense. And so the question is, how did that meditation, 11-step meditation, become a daily 10-step inventory? What we're going to see is that when we look at the AA 12 and 12 and the OA 12 and 12, they do explicitly talk about a daily 10-step inventory, which is what that evening inventory of the 11th step is. So the question of when did it get transferred from being in the 11th step to being in the 10th step? Well, the big book was published in 1939, and the AA 12 was published in 1953. That means sometime between 1939 and 1953, AA moved that 11th step meditation as a 10th step daily inventory. So now we're going to go on and talk about the AA 12 and 12, and then eventually the OA 12 and 12. And Sue, you're going to take over for the AA 12 and 12.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Frank. Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the AA 12 and 12 meditation information as I am with the big book, but here we go. How about, yeah, although all inventories are alike in principle, the time factor does distinguish one from another. There's the spot inventory, and I've heard that is called the walking around step. That's the 10th step in the spot inventory. Taking at any time of the day, whenever we find ourselves getting tangled up, or I like to say disturbed in any way. There's the one we take at day's end, and this is all out of the AA 12 and 12. When we review the happenings of the hours just past, here we cast up a balance sheet, crediting ourselves with things well done and chalking up debits where due. And then the next slide. Then there are the occasions when alone or in the company of a sponsor or a spiritual advisor, we take a careful review of our progress since the last time. Many OAs go to an annual or a semi-annual house cleaning. And many of us also like to experience an occasional retreat from the outside world where we can quiet down for an undisturbed day or so to self-overhaul and meditation. And our intergroup actually has a retreat upcoming in the end of April. And I hope Rick will put that in the chat so everybody that's interested in the area can join. Next slide. Before we ask what a spot check inventory is, let's look at the kind of setting in which such an inventory can do its work. And here, I think Frank talked about this before. It's one of my favorite lines in the 12 and 12. It is a spiritual axiom that every time we are disturbed, no matter what the cause, there is something wrong with us. It's if somebody hurts us and we're sore, which is another word for resentment or anger, we are in the wrong also. Let's see. But are there no exceptions to this rule? What about justifiable anger? I have to laugh at that one because it feels so powerful to be justifiably angry. If somebody cheats us, aren't we entitled to be mad? And next slide. So the answer to all of those is no, but can't we be properly angry with self-righteous folks? For us of OA, these are dangerous exceptions. We found that, and in the big book, it says something about these are dubious. This is a dubious luxury of normal people. I love that. We have found that justified anger ought to be left to those better qualified to handle it, maybe what we would call, in quotes, normal people. And then Frank's got in this slide more good advice about resentment. So there's a couple of more pages, I think, about resentments in the big book, or in the AA 12 and 12 that follows this. And then we also recommend, while you're doing the 10th step, that you refer to the page 417 in the 4th edition, and acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. And I won't go into that, but it's a beautiful, beautiful chapter and prayer. In all these situations, we need self-restraint, honest analysis of what is involved, a willingness to admit when the fault is ours, and an equal willingness to forgive when the fault is elsewhere. And next slide. We need not be discouraged when we fall into error of our old ways, for these disciplines are not easy. We shall look for progress, not perfection. Our first objective will be the development of self-restraint. This carries a top priority. And then there's 2 pages. I think that's where it talks about self-restraint of tongue, pen, and now maybe social media. Let's see, courtesy, kindness, justice, and love are the keynotes by which we may come into harmony with practically anybody. When in doubt, we can always pause, saying, not my will, but thine be done. And we can often ask ourselves, am I doing to others as I would have them done to me today? Boy, that sounds like the golden rule. The next slide, please.
So now we're in a daily inventory.
Oh, yes. Now we're in the 12-step, the 12 by 12 daily inventory. When evening comes, perhaps just before going to bed, many of us draw up a balance sheet for the day. This is a good place to remember that inventory taking is not always done in red ink. It's a poor day indeed when we haven't done something right. And I remember when I first started the program, my sponsor used to have me take a piece of paper and put a line down the middle and put what I did well during the day and what were the red ink things that I wish I could have done better. And now the next slide, please, Frank. As we glance down the debit sheet of the day's ledger, we should carefully examine our motives in each thought or act that appears to be wrong. In most cases, our motives won't be hard to see and understand. When prideful, angry, jealous, anxious, or fearful, we act accordingly, and that is that. And next slide. But in other instances, only the closest scrutiny will reveal what our true motives were. There are cases where our ancient enemy, rationalization, has stepped in and has justified conduct which was really wrong. And there's more information in the 12 and 12 about that. Next slide. Having so considered our day, not omitting to take due note of things well done, and having searched our hearts with neither fear nor favor, we can truly thank God for the blessings we have received and sleep in good conscience. And that is it from the AA 12 and 12.
And that's the end of step 10 in the AA book. Now, notice at the beginning, they talked about three ways: the spot inventory, the daily inventory, and the semi-annual or semi-annual house cleanings. But they didn't give you any explicit instructions on those house cleanings. However, last year at our OA Silicon Valley 2021 retreat, the leader of that retreat recommended doing the 10th step by occasionally redoing steps 4 through 9. That was his major way of doing a 10th step. And what he said, and this is from a PDF that he released. And again, the links for this will be in that file that we're going to give you at the end of the presentation here. He says, step 10, however, is designed to deal with resentments, fears, and sex conduct issues that have accumulated since you last did a step 4 through 9 or a step 10. Now, I might be putting words in his mouth here, but I think he would claim that you only do step 4 through 9 one time. When you first come into the program, you work all 12 of the steps, and that's when you do steps 4 through 9. From then on, whenever you do something that looks like step 4 through 9, you're really doing step 10. So you're either doing step 10 or you're doing step 4 through 9. And that's what I think he's claiming here. He says, in other words, it's for the big things that you haven't been able to capture during your evening meditations. Now, this guy was a really big book thumper. And he basically, everything he presented was straight out of the big book. So that's why he's calling this a daily, the evening meditation was the daily evening meditation that he's talking about, which we normally think of as a daily 10th step. So I think he's doing daily 10 steps, but he's just calling it a daily evening meditation. And then he calls for this big house cleaning by going through steps 4 through 9. Now he proposes a 12-question quiz to know when you need to redo steps 4 through 9. And I'm going to show you that quiz on this next page here. So there are 12 items here. 3 of these items come from the doctor's opinion. Am I restless, irritable, or discontented? And then 8 of the items come from the bedevilments. If you're not familiar with the bedevilments, they're on Big Book page 52, and they are basically the exact opposite of the 9th step promises. You can sit down and go through, look at each of the 9th step promises. You'll find a bedevilment, which is basically the opposite of the 9th step promise. So they match up really. You can do a 1-to-1 matching up of them, or at least a 2-to-1 in some cases, but they really match up with the 9th step promises. So if any of these bedevilments, you're not controlling your emotional nature, you can't make a living, am I unhappy? Any of those bedevilments are a reason for doing a step 10, an in-depth step 10. And then his last reason is my food or quantity of food getting sloppy. So you can use your food, whether it's getting sloppy or not, to be an indicator of whether or not you need to do this house cleaning type of step 10. And the retreat leader's recommendation is that if you answer any of these 12 questions with a yes, you should do one of these extensive step 10s of going through steps 4 through 9 on that issue or whatever issues you need to go through there. So again, you can download a PDF of his of this instructions, and it's on page 54 and 56 of that PDF. And the links will be in the link thing that we're going to give you at the end here. And also I wanted to mention, like Sue did, that the OA 2022 retreat is coming up April 22 to 24. And you can find out more about the retreat on our website. Again, that link will be in our list of links. So this is a way of doing an annual or semi-annual house cleaning, kind of the AA way to point of view. Now let's go over to the step 10 from the OA 12 and 12. So step 10 says, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admit it. And the OA 12 and 12 says that the spiritual principle for this is perseverance. And they explain it by saying that the 10th step begins with the word continued as our first clear clue that perseverance is about to become a key aspect of our recovery program. And I think perseverance would actually apply to step 10, 11, and 12, that you need to do this on a daily basis. So you need to persevere on doing steps 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. And then we'll skip some text. The purpose of step 10 is to identify and remove from our path today stumbling blocks, those manifestations of pride, fear, anger, self-pity, greed, and other emotions that are bringing pain into our lives and keeping us from growing today. So their list of character defects there are slightly different from the others, but they cover the same ground. First of all, they say a spot check inventory taken whenever we find ourselves facing difficulties is something we can learn to do in a few moments of quiet reflection whenever the need arises. With practice, it becomes easier to recognize the exact nature of our problems and see what actions we need to take to restore our serenity. Actions we will carry out promptly, as step 10 advises. Perhaps we've forgotten our step 3 decision and are trying to control some aspect of our life by self-will. That's my problem always, my self-will. Or do we need to discuss the problem with our sponsors and ask our higher power to remove a character defect? Have we wronged someone and now owe amends? Here we're talking about basically steps 5, 6, and 7. Are we applying the 12 steps in the underlying principles to our situation? Once we begin to practice this pattern of on-the-spot analysis and action, whenever we're disturbed, it becomes a habit for us, and we discover we learned an amazing new set of skills for successful living. Well, I'm still trying to learn that amazing new set of skills, but I hope I'm making some progress on it. So that's the advice for the spot check inventory. And then they go on to talk about the daily 10th step. Some of us make a daily habit of reviewing our emotions and behaviors of the past 24 hours. A more leisurely and careful analysis than the spot check inventory, a daily inventory may be written or done mentally. Its purpose is to reveal those areas where we have difficulties in our daily lives and help us determine what we can do about them. There are several ways to take a daily inventory. And here's the first suggestion. Some of us simply review the major events of the day in chronological order, making note of the feelings we had and how we dealt with those feelings. Some of us draw up a balance sheet listing negative feelings and events on one side and positive feeling and events on the other. And that's what the AA 12 and 12 recommended. Some of us work from a list of common character defects and assets, such as fear, faith, resentment, acceptance, greed, generosity, and so on. Referring to this list, we ask ourselves such questions as, what fears did I experience today and how did I react to them? Then we list and recall those instances where we became aware that our former defects had been removed, when we acted on faith, when we were accepting and forgiving, letting go of resentments, when we were selfless, or when we exhibited other positive character traits. After we've taken our daily inventory, we can follow through with the second half of step 10, which says, when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. This simple clause implies that we have the opportunity to do more than just look at our defects and assets. We can take the same actions with them that we did with the character traits we found in our 4th step inventory. So when we find one of these flaws, we can discuss them with our higher power, sponsors, or perhaps another person. Turn the defects over, asking our higher power to remove them, and make amends where they are due. And then they go on and talk about an extensive kind of inventory. So they cover all 3 kinds, the spot check, the daily inventory, and the extensive inventory. A 10-step inventory can also be more extensive, similar to the one we took in step 4, but dealing with the problems we may not have been aware of when we originally took step 4. An extensive 10-step inventory might focus on one particular character defect, behavior, or area of life. So you can do it on one, but I think you'd also be allowed to do it and basically do another step 4 on everything again, or you can focus on just one. We will probably want to write this inventory as we did in the 4th step. We certainly want to follow through with prompt action. As soon as possible, we want to give this inventory away to another person. So that's doing a step 5 on that step 4 inventory. After that, we will repeat the actions of steps 6 and 7, in particular, asking our higher power to heal our wounds, to remove any defects that we have discovered in our investigation, and help us change our behavior. So that's working steps 6 and 7. Then we'll complete this course of action by listing and making any amends we might owe in connection with the events listed in this inventory. And that's working steps 8 and 9 on this inventory. The OA bookstore has a downloadable workbook that can be used to work all 12 of the steps. And the bookstore is at this link here. And again, the link will be available in the file. And you can download this OA 12 Steps and 12 Traditions workbook as a PDF for only $7.50. Now, since it's copyrighted, I will only show you a sample of 3 of the 24 step 10 questions in that book. I don't want to violate the copyright by doing all 24 of them. But here's 3 of them. What actions do I take today that I may continue to experience recovery? How do I continue to work my program even during those times when I feel it isn't working or I'm not recovering quickly enough? And what is the purpose of step 10? And then it goes on for 21 other more questions there. So that's it in terms of covering the AA Big Book, the AA 12 and 12, and the OA 12 and 12. And now Sue's going to take it back again and talk about ways to take daily inventory. And these are the ways that Sue's going to talk about. Go ahead, Sue.
Frank, I'm thinking that since we only have about 15 minutes left, that I'm just going to tell people about that here's a template that you can just take in your hand, and it'll tell you everything you need to know about a 10th step.
And all those other ones that we mentioned here, they are going to be in the foils and in the PowerPoint and that we send you in the links here.
Great. And I'll let Gina come on now if
well, you said you were going to do the 10th step.
Oh, I thought I would, not the 10th step template. I think we'll go through that, but we'll let our guests show us different ways that they do the 10th step. I think since this template will be listed in the PDF, we might as well just move on to because of time.
Okay. All right. And that's a separate file that's available in the links file I'm going to give you.
Okay. And I think Gina is going to come on and talk about how she does this daily inventory on AEIO and U.
So thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Gina, compulsive overeater, and thanks so much for inviting me to do this today. And after listening to Susan Frank's wonderful talk, I think I'm going to change the way that I have been doing this. But this is like a really fun and simple thing that I've enjoyed doing. Have I been abstinent today? And my first thought about that was, well, oh, that's easy. It's always going to be yes. But I found that this really helps me be honest. And I can say, well, but I picked off some food off my daughter's plate when I was putting it away. Or say, I noticed I had a lot of cravings after having gum or something like that. So anything that can help you be honest about how your food's going. And a lot of those are things I wouldn't necessarily tell my sponsor over the phone, but then it's like, I kind of noticed this. I felt a little weird after I ate this today or something. So for E, have I exercised today? Now that could also, I think if you in the past have been an exercise bulimic, you could also admit to saying you over-exercised. But that's not been my problem in the past. And so it's also a good reminder, if I didn't get exercise in, what can I do to plan to get it done tomorrow? And even some of the simple things like I took the stairs instead of the elevator or something because I couldn't get my my regular exercise in that day. So what have I done for myself today? So that can be, anything from self-care. I try and focus on program, but it could really be anything. But it could be I took some extra time to meditate today. I read and journaled on a step today. Made an extra outreach call, that sort of thing. But it doesn't necessarily have to be, as Frank explained, just like program related. Now, definitely should be expanded on. So what have I done for others today? So that could be making an outreach call, or possibly, even, one time somebody's calling, it wasn't the best time, but I took that call anyway. But it could be just like Frank said, I think he even had a simple example of just, when you're driving down the road and letting somebody go first. It can be, or being extra nice to the person at the checkout line. And then what I think really needs to be added here is, and somebody explained to me, is what do I owe others today? Or do I owe an apology? And I think this is where you want to really look at, was I selfish, dishonest, resentful, fearful, those sorts of things. And, ask, was love and tolerance my code for today? So that one you could really expand on, I think. You is probably my favorite because I think that gives me some sort of aha moments and really helps me learn things. So you can be, unmet needs. A lot of times people will say, so like, I felt upset because my family wasn't appreciative of something I did, and I need that appreciation. And so when you get it down there, then you can really sort of start to look at, is this something I need to let go? Do I need to do a prayer? What can I do to help those unmet needs? And also sometimes for you, when I started doing this, I did, what is my understanding of my disease? And if I really look at it each day, there's always something that I can learn. And my big thing right now is I've learned I have a daughter who's a Girl Scout, and it is not a good idea to have 20 cases of Girl Scout cookies in my garage. So, and so it's pretty simple. Next year, she's just going to do boots. We'll make maybe a donation to the troop. We can still advertise to, and the sales can go to other girls in our troop that have, maybe 2 siblings or something like that. But, the understanding, or just even, I had a lot of cravings and I was really resentful about such and such. So that one has been like very, very powerful for me. And then the why is one I didn't start doing, but I really think it's super important. And like Sue said, we have to, we can't just look at our defects all the time. We also have to look at the things that we do that make us feel really good about ourselves. And so that could be, well, you can come up with your own ideas, but yay, I decided to give up such and such for a month today, or it's such and such. I'm talking about food. Or I just took some time to go out for a little walk for myself or something like that. And so I think, when I do that, when I feel good about myself and my cravings for food, the better and more content I am with myself, the less I crave the foods that are out there. And obviously this can be modified, any which way that really helps you in your program. So pass.
Thank you so much, Gina. And if someone could unmute Trish, she's going to talk to us about the 4 Gs.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Trish, compulsive overeater. Hopefully the dog doesn't start barking right now. He's been really good. Sorry about that. This is a list of the 4 Gs. And the first one is gratitude, to list things that you're grateful for. The next one is good, things that you've done well. The third one is glitch, where you fell short, maybe your resentments or your fears. And the fourth one is your goal. What could you do better? Your intentions for the day. And what I do with this is, I was thinking this is more of a day end inventory, or I would do it the following morning. And I would just do a review of my day. It's a quick little inventory. I think I have an example. For gratitude, it can be as many as you want. I used to, because I'm a perfectionist, I'm like, I have to do 3 of each, but really you could write anything, and as many as you want. And there was this saying in another program that I was in that I really liked about gratitude. And it says that our disease is a disease of negativity, and our contented abstinence depends on our willingness to replace negative thoughts and feelings with thankful ones. In the past, we thought of gratitude as a feeling, but we now practice it as an action. And so gratitude as an action means I'm making a gratitude list. And I'm also recognizing when I do have that negative thinking so that I can replace my thoughts at that moment. Gratitude lists have really helped switch my thinking, especially in the morning time. And then for what's good, and I just listed some things here, but for good, I like to think of, was I thinking of what I could do for others and what I could pack into the stream of life, because that's what it says in the 10th step. I also like to put on here too, what did I do good for myself? Where was my self-care? And what did I do that was good that did not involve food or food thoughts, or, was there some sort of self-care that I did? Yeah, and then the glitch, which I can go through my days, and a lot of times I see that that resentment comes up and fear comes up and worry comes up and, that self-sufficiency comes up. And, it doesn't happen on a daily. Some days I don't have any glitches. I can make it through without this. But so for the glitch, I continue to watch for resentment, selfish, dishonest, and fear. And off of this list right here, this sometimes if it's getting a little long, this also is a time where I say, do I need to do a thorough 10-step with my sponsor so that I can really break this down? Why is this resentment occurring over and over again? I need to look at my part. I need to look at my character defects. And this is just a way for me to see if I need to do a thorough 10-step. And then the goal would be, what can I do better? And what are my intentions? Sometimes when I first started this, I'm really good at making to-do lists. So I started to make to-do lists. Well, this is what I'm going to do. And then I kind of didn't want to do that, because my goal is how can I show up for others? How can I participate in my recovery? What can I do again to pack into the stream of life for somebody else? So the 4 Gs, it's super simple. It really takes, just a few minutes to write it out. And I would do this and then text it to my sponsor every day. And so, I don't know, this is a quick and easy way just to put your thoughts and feelings down on paper and to realize if you need to do a more intensive 10th step. So I think that's all I have.
Well, thank you, Gina and Trish. That was wonderful. So that's the link right there. So what we're going to have here, if you click on that link, you're going to go to a Google Drive, and it's going to have the PowerPoint slides itself. It's going to have the links that we talked about, having all the links available here. It's going to have the AEIOU inventory, the character defects that we showed, the prayer for freedom, and the 4 Gs. Those are all available at that Google Drive, and it's just that bit.ly link. And you have to type it with the uppercase for the S there. It has to be typed exactly like that, 10th step with S capitalized, because it's not a long link that you have to get exactly right. It's the most important thing is bit.ly/10th step, capital S. You want to go through the questions, Elizabeth?
Sure. Question number 1 is, has anyone used Drop the Rock, the ripple effect, in learning more about 10th step and using methods described?
Well, I've got the book. I've read it mostly. It is actually an outside issue, so we probably shouldn't be talking about it here, but it is written by a couple of AA people, and it's specific for the 6th and 7th step. So yeah, we don't usually mention outside literature here.
Okay, perfect. I hadn't heard of that one, so I wasn't sure. Thank you. Next question. At the beginning, Frank, you mentioned talking about a primary purpose book for inventory. Is that the OA workbook?
No, the primary purpose group is a group of OA people that go through the big book one line at a time. And there's a book that was written by the AA primary purpose group in Texas. I forget, Austin, I forget, somewhere in Texas, they have an IA primary purpose AA group. And they came up with this list of questions for each line of the big book. And you read the question, and the answer to that question is that line of the big book. And then we discuss it. So it's a big book study method, and it's not, it's not official OA literature, but any kind of a big book study that goes in great detail like that. The thing I really liked about it is it also included a lot of history of AA back in that time. It talked a lot about the founders of the program and things like that. So there was a lot of good information there, but there are OA, if you look for OA primary purpose, there's a website that has the links to all their meetings, and that's how they work the program, straight out of the big book.
Awesome. Next question. Let's see, this one's for you, Frank. Can you talk more about how we get past deep fears?
I don't know. Fear has never been one of my biggest things. Sue, do you have any good advice about fears? Resentments and anger is my big thing.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. In the big book, there is a lot of pages on fear. And if you just follow that and do an inventory with someone, do the actual fear inventory, and it tells you exactly how to do it in the big book. and then give it to somebody, and then make sure that you pray to ask God to remove your fear and ask him what he would have you be. And just wait for the miracle to happen.
Awesome, thank you. Next one, Frank, you mentioned, let's see, he mentioned that he simply texts his defect where other people I know really stress making a phone call and sharing it. Frank, can you talk more about that and your experience?
Yeah, it's up to you and you and your sponsor. If your sponsor wants you to actually call and talk to them about it, that's perfectly fine. There's no problem with that. You know, it's up to you. There's no right or wrong. That's what my sponsor came up with. We decided that I would just send him a text and that would be good enough. I mean, if there is something I need to discuss, like if I'm really not sure if I need to make an amends or not, I will call him and I will make the amends at that point in time. So it's up to you and your sponsor.
Awesome. Are the slides going to be available in the PDFs that you had mentioned? Is that what?
Yes, you should be able to click on that link right now and see all the slides that we presented. In fact, you'll see the slides we didn't present too.
Okay, perfect. This one is for either of you guys, I think. Do you know who the author is to the first resentment prayer that was said that you read, Sue, on page 552, chapter Freedom from Bondage?
I possibly have it in my big book. I'm not sure if I have the name, but that is the, go ahead, Elizabeth.
So I grabbed out my big book. It does say freedom from bondage, young when she joined. This AA believes her serious drinking was the result of even deeper defects. She here tells us how she was set free. Is that the person who wrote this chapter?
Well,
yes,
that is who wrote it. Yeah. And if you really want to know, I would just Google freedom from bondage, big book, and that would come up with who the author was.
Perfect. Okay, last question, guys. Any tips on how to stop ourselves before we lash out in anger to those close to us or people we work with, and how to prevent offending or being aggressive when we are contradicted?
Well, this is where you need to install a watchdog timer. You know, do a little brain surgery and put a watchdog timer in there that will get triggered when you start to do that and remind you to stop. And, you know, there's no magic trick. I think the answer is keep trying over and over. Have the intention to not do that and to notice as quickly as possible when you have started to engage in that. And you know, it's like anything else, practice makes perfect. The more and more 10 steps you do, the better you do with them and the better effect it has. Sue, would you like to add anything?
The only thing I was going to add is if I'm really disturbed, I need to pause, absolutely pause, and ask God to take away, if it's the anger, if it's the fear, and as soon as I possibly can, do a 10 step. And maybe excuse myself and just say that, boy, I need a time out here. I need to just get a quiet time. That's probably the best I can think of.
Okay, we have one last question. Gina has her hand up. Go ahead, Gina. You should be able to unmute.
Oh, thank you. Oh, well, it was not for a question, but actually to answer that, I'm trying something recently with what to do when my daughters start pushing my buttons. And so I have a list of 5 or more things that when they start to push my buttons that I could take care of. And one is cleaning something off my messy desk. Another thing is just doing like 5 push-ups on the counter. And so it really helps get my brain off that onto something else that's positive and gives me something positive. And then it just brings my anxiety level down tremendously. So that's been really helpful recently.
Great. Do we want to end there, or do we want to see if anybody has if anybody wants to share? What do you think, Frank?
Well, I think I should end the recording. So all that